The Daily Wire's Megan Basham recently published her book, Shepherds for Sale, in which she argues, and I think probably demonstrates, that leftist organizations have used money and other influences to get a foothold into the larger evangelical culture in order to convince pastors and other Christian leaders to steer the American evangelical church in a leftist direction on a variety of issues. One of those issues is the question of anthropogenic or human-caused climate change. And in the first chapter of her book, in which she covers that topic, she uses roughly a quarter of her chapter to discuss a video from 2022 by a guy named Gavin Ortlund. But the question is, does Basham represent Ortlund correctly, or does she misrepresent him? And what does that matter? Those are the kinds of questions that we'll ask and answer in today's episode of Theopologetics. This is Chris Day, and welcome to Theopologetics, where every other week I discuss a wide variety of theological issues and show how a properly biblical worldview can help defend the historic Christian faith from its critics. Join me as we think through what we believe and why we believe it, and not something else. So today we're going to be discussing... Oh, you're hearing double audio, are you? Oh, yeah, I know why that is. But now, are you not hearing double audio? Let me know, my friend. Study is key. Let me know, guys. Let me know if it's still double. If it is, I think it was just because the intro music was playing. I think that's what you meant. So, okay, good. Yeah, my bad. It has to do with how I'm setting up the screen share here. Anyway, boy, what a poor start. Anyway, I'm human. I do get some things wrong. So today we're going to be discussing the book that you can see on the screen right now, Shepherds for Sale, How Evangelical Leaders Traded the Truth for a Leftist Agenda. And I'm just going to jump right in. Like normally I like to sort of talk about, subscribing and all that kind of stuff. But because there may be additional attention, thank you everybody for letting me know the audio is fine now. I'm just going to jump right in. In this book, one way of characterizing the premise of Megan Basham's book is the way that she does it in this portion of her introduction. My ultimate purpose, she writes, is to confirm for average evangelicals in the pews that your pulpits and your institutions are being co-opted by political forces with explicitly secular progressive aims. That is indeed happening. And this book focuses on false or misguided shepherds, hence the title Shepherds for Sale. Now, let me just say from the outset, I think this is true. I'll touch on this a little bit later. I think this is true. And I bought the book excited, as I'll talk about in a few moments, excited to see the receipts in support of this suspicion that I've already had for some time. In the first chapter of her book on the matter of climate change, one of the things that Megan writes is that the average believer is skeptical of the apocalyptic claims in the headlines, that is, claims of climate alarmism. And the only way to persuade this average believer is to convince him that it is a matter of Christian witness and biblical obedience. To turn environmentalism into creation care would take a branding campaign. Here again, I largely agree with what Megan Basham is saying. I think most of us evangelical Christians are skeptical of the of climate alarmism. I certainly am, and I do think that there are people, institutions, who are rebranding environmentalism and climate alarmism as creation care and making it a matter of Christian, biblical faithfulness, to try and convince increasing numbers of evangelicals to adopt to adopt an alarmist stance, and I'm opposed to that. So far, so good. I bought the book because right now I'm going through another book representing sort of the other side. I forget the author's name. I think it's Tim Alberta or something like that. And Megan mentions the guy's book in her own. But I'm like halfway through that book, and some things are interesting and compelling. A lot of it is not. But I wanted to get the other side, and so I bought this book and started reading chapter 1, and came upon a whole section that largely focuses on a pastor by the name of Gavin Ortlund. She writes on pages 24 and 25 of her book, California pastor Gavin Ortlund may not have reached the name recognition of Rick Warren, but then she goes on to describe a video that he did back in 2022. And the key theme of that episode, which is titled Climate Change, Why Christians Should Engage, is indeed representative of somebody who thinks that the climate is changing dramatically and dangerously as a result, in large part, of human activity. And I don't even think he would dispute that characterization of it. However, the problem, as I see it, as I saw it, as I was reading it, was this. I was highly dubious. I was highly skeptical of the claims that Megan was making about Gavin Ortlund, because I have watched a number of his videos and have been incredibly impressed by his graciousness, by his cool-headedness and his calmness. Megan in the book calls it sort of a preppy guru vibe. Sure, maybe, but nevertheless, he treats people who disagree with him on various topics with grace and with respect, and that's something I admire and strive to do myself. It's something I don't do nearly as well as he does, although I'm trying to. So I was skeptical that what Megan was saying about Gavin's video was accurate, and so then I went, after reading this chapter in its completion. I haven't read the rest of the book. I'm sure most of the rest of the book is fantastic, but we'll talk about why this matters in a moment. When I was done with the chapter, including everything that Megan says about Gavin Ortlund, I went and I watched the video that she's talking about. And when I was done, it became pretty clear to me that Megan had really done an injustice to Gavin and his video in the way that she characterizes it. So here's a summary of the critique I'm about to offer and why I think it matters. Firstly, let me just note that my critique here is limited to exclusively what Megan says about Ortlund's video in chapter 1 of her book. All right. So there's been two response videos that Gavin has done since the book's publication. There have been blog articles and other YouTube videos where people are discussing. Twitter's blown up about all of this. What I'm about to offer has nothing whatsoever to do with all of that. I'm focused like a laser beam, to use a phrase that I think I learned from Michael Medved, on chapter 1 of Megan Basham's book and her handling of Gavin Ortlund. And my critique it boils down to the following. In her book, in chapter 1 of her book, Basham badly misrepresents Ortlund, and in the process defames him. Defaming is to cast a negative light on somebody's reputation, that kind of thing. And Ortlund's reputation has been harmed by this. Maybe not exclusively because of what Basham writes in her chapter, but because of the fallout. Elisa Childers, whom I'm a huge fan of and have a great amount of respect for, she has doubled down in saying she doesn't think that Basham misrepresents Ortlund. And that's going to cause tons of her many followers to accept Megan's characterization of Ortlund's video. And as a result, develop a negative impression about him and his ministry. So Basham in this chapter, as I will go on to demonstrate, badly misrepresents Ortlund and in the process defames him, or at the very least contributes to the defamation of him. And here's what's really important. There are some debatable what I would call misrepresentations. And I'm going to argue that they certainly seem to be. But even if we set those few debatable misrepresentations aside, there are several that are undeniable. There's no denying it. And I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove it to you today. Now, why does this matter? Well, in the very first, these misrepresentations, if indeed they are what I'm claiming they are, in the very first chapter of the book, because they're in the very first chapter of the book, let alone in the book at all, is going to cast a great deal of doubt on the rest of the book, which is going to stymie its impact. Remember what I said earlier. I already buy into the major premise of Megan's book. I want to see the receipts. I want to see this book have the kind of impact that it is intended to have. But what happens when you mix some glaring misrepresentations, especially at the beginning of an entire larger case, the vast majority of which may be great and powerful and compelling, when you do that, swarms of people are going to latch onto the misrepresentations. And as a result, they're going to be less likely to take seriously what you have to say throughout the rest of the book. So, as a result, in part of what Megan has written about Gavin in this chapter of her book, as a result of that, in part, this book will not have as positive an impact as it could have had. That's one reason why this matters. And then at least a second reason for why it matters is because if I'm right, and I think I'm going to demonstrate that I am, Basham, as a Christian, may be guilty of bearing false witness, and not just bearing false witness, but a false witness against a brother in Christ. We're not supposed to bear false witness against anybody, of course, as Christians, but I'm convinced anyway, based on my reading of especially the New Testament, that there is an even higher standard to which we are to hold our behavior when it pertains to, when it affects brothers and sisters in Christ. And if I'm right, as I will demonstrate that I am, Basham may be guilty of bearing false witness. And especially problematic is that it will have been against a brother in Christ. And what I want to appeal to Megan, I hope and pray that Megan watches this. My appeal to you, I'll speak to you directly, Megan, in the hope that you watch. My appeal to you is that you would just apologize and retract at least some of what you've said about Gavin. Maybe even try to get the publisher to allow you to publish a second printing that cleans up some of the mistakes that you made about Gavin, because that, owning up to your mistake, apologizing for it, making it right, will, at least to some of those people whose opinion about your book, even possibly before they've read it, is now much more negative than it could have been, at least some of them will be willing to give the rest of your book a fair hearing, because you'll have shown the integrity to say, I was wrong, and I'm going to try to make it right by changing the book, and Gavin, I'm sorry. Please, Megan, hear me out and do that, because I want your book to be successful. As it stands right now, there are going to be swarms, hordes of people that find your book compelling, and the vast majority of them are going to be people for whom your book is just red meat. It's people that already largely accept what you're having to say. But your book is, if you don't do what I'm appealing to you to do, your book is going to not be as effective as it could. Here's an example. One of my viewers in the chat says, I can attest to what you're saying. I myself am much less tempted to buy this book as a result of it misrepresenting Gavin Ortlund. And then here's another viewer right now watching us live who says that Megan shot herself in the foot with chapter 1, misrepresenting Gavin to people who know better, and she smeared his ministry to the unknowing reader. So you're damaging your witness, Megan. You're harming your own mission in publishing this book. I'm sure your interest is not merely in giving red meat to people who already agree with you. I'm sure that you want to change the minds and hearts of some people who don't already share your perspective. But the ability of your book to do that is going to be hindered by your misrepresentation of Gavin Ortlund. And that's why I'm appealing to you to make things right. It sucks. I know I've had to do it myself. But it's the right thing to do, and it's the strategic thing to do if you want your book to have the impact that I know you want it to have, and that I want it to have. So I'm going to get into the details here in a moment, but before I get to the details, let me talk for a moment about why I think that the critique I'm about to offer can't be easily dismissed. I've seen a lot of people's claims that Gavin is being misrepresented. I see them being chalked up to being part of Big Eva. That's what Elisa Childers did, or being obsessed with and fearful of Christian nationalism and stuff like that. You're not going to be able to dismiss me in these ways. And here's a number of reasons why. Number one, I reject anthropogenic climate change. I don't believe that humans are contributing to the warming of the planet. In fact, I am skeptical even of the claim that global temperature averages are rising. Now, I'm not going to try to defend that skepticism here. That's not the point. My point is, I am already somebody who rejects what the position that Gavin represents in his video. And I was excited to read a lot of the things that Megan says in this first chapter of the book because I think it adds some really important evidence to consider when we evaluate the question of climate change. So you're not going to be able to dismiss me as some kind of climate activist or something. I reject anthropogenic climate change. Secondly, I'm not at all a part of Big Eva, whatever that is. I'm way too conservative and borderline fundamentalist for that. I am a young earth creationist. I am a biblical inerrantist. I don't believe that there are any errors in scripture. I am. I still lean in a complementarian direction. That is, belief that men are intended to hold the position of elder in the church. I just am not. I'm way too opposed to the gender ideology and transgenderism and LGBTQ issues. Way too opposed to that stuff and vocal about it. All last year, 2023, the entire month of June, every single day, I celebrated on Facebook and on Twitter people who are fighting gender ideology, transgenderism, and other LGBTQ issues. And I did that for several days in June this year as well. There are many ways in which Big Eva would want nothing to do with me. And frankly, I want little to do with them. And I don't have any fear of Christian nationalism. I don't, when I say that, what I mean is I don't think that Christian nationalism is the big boogeyman that it's being made out to be. Some of the viewers watching right now will probably think I'm out to lunch for having that opinion, but I do. So you can't dismiss what I say because I'm part of Big Eva or I'm just terrified of Christian nationalism and want to try to, cast doubt on Megan's book because of that. No, I'm not part of Big Eva. And I don't fear Christian nationalism. The reason I mentioned Christian nationalism, by the way, is because I saw somebody on Twitter dismissing criticism of Megan's book because it's allegedly from people who are afraid of Christian nationalism. I'm a conservative fan of the Daily Wire and its speakers, especially Matt Walsh. In fact, right here is a stuffed toy that represents Sweet Baby Gang. Those of us who are regular watchers of Matt Walsh's daily show on the Daily Wire. I watch religiously every day. I'm not even kidding. I watch every single day's episode of Matt Walsh's show. And it's not just that. I watched Lady Ballers the second it came out. I've watched several of their movies, and I'm a huge fan of the Daily Wire. And so here again, I'm not going to be able to be easily dismissed as some kind of squishy liberal leaning person or something like that who just doesn't like the harsh tones of people on the Daily Wire. No, I'm comfortable with those tones, even if I'm not personally comfortable using them myself, at least as much as Matt and some of the others appear to be. And by the way, it's not just Matt Walsh. I also like I've forgotten his name. The guy who got into trouble because at a CPAC meeting, he said that transgenderism needs to be eradicated in the public square. I agree with him. And I don't like his show as much as Matt Walsh's, but I like it too. So yeah, I'm predisposed to like what Megan Basham has to say, being already a fan of the Daily Wire, the organization of which she's a part. I'm not particularly close to Ortlund. We do count each other friends because we've got something of a warm acquaintanceship, but we've only met once 10 years ago. And we've hardly spoken since, only passing Facebook messages to each other over the past few years. If you looked at 10 years of messaging history between us, you would find a tiny handful of messages between us. So I'm not going in and trying to defend somebody that I'm a buddy with or something like that. Yes, I count him a friend, but I'm not super close to him. So my motivation here is not taking up an offense for somebody I care about and just trying to find some way to justify my offense for him. Michael Knowles, thank you, study is key. I am I'm defending him because it's the right thing to do. And then lastly, as I already said earlier, I already buy the basic thrust of Megan's book, and I was excited to see the receipts. And I think there are some receipts in chapter 1 and probably a lot in the rest of the book. But now it's much more difficult for me to share that with people because it so blatantly misrepresents Gavin Ortlund at the beginning, the very beginning of the book, chapter 1. Very beginning is a little loose because there is an introduction prior to chapter 1, but you get my point. All right. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive into part 1, where I'm going to offer 4 what I think are undeniable, undebatable misrepresentations. There's just no getting around them. First, this conspiracy and hoax phrase that Megan uses. She writes on chapter 20 or on page 26 to not accept that consensus, and here she's talking about the alleged scientific consensus that humans are contributing largely significantly to a dangerous change of climate. To not accept that consensus, Ortlund says, is to buy into, quote, conspiracy and hoax. It is a failure to, quote, take a responsible posture as a Christian. We'll come back to the responsible posture thing in a moment. But notice the claim here. The claim isn't unambiguous. Wait, sorry. No, the claim is unambiguous. There's no denying what the claim is here. The claim is Ortlund says that those who reject the consensus buy into conspiracy and hoax. And the reality is this is undeniably false. There's no denying that this claim is false. Now, I'm about to play the first of several clips from that first video that Gavin did, and these are deliberately long, a couple of minutes in some cases. And it's because I don't want there to be any risk that somebody's going to say, oh, I took that out of context to make it look better than it was. No. You're going to hear the whole couple of minutes in small portions of which Megan has taken quotes from. So here's what do I got here? Well, I don't have the time. Oh yeah, here's 2.5 minutes in which he uses that phrase conspiracy and hoax, and then I'll break it down.
And when I listen to the skeptics about climate change, I am not impressed. I know I'll offend some people with this who are instinctively skeptical, but I really just have to say there's basically 3 responses people can make. One is to deny that the planet is warming up. Now that is really hard, and almost nobody does that because it's just so evident. I'll put up a picture of the average surface air temperatures from 2011 to 2022 compared to the 1956 to 1976 average. And you can see it's pretty clear the planet is heating up. That's usually not where people dispute it. You can also just see the effects in terms of snowcap receding and glaciers receding and sea level rising and so forth. It's pretty hard to deny that the planet is heating up. The more common responses.
One thing I want to point out here is that the text I've got up on the video I produced, this was not in his original video. I just wanted to be able to see and read along with the words that he is speaking, where they're relevant.
This is number 1 to say, okay, yes, that's happening, but it's a natural cycle, not human caused. Or to say, probably the most reasonable line of defense is, okay, that's happening, but our contribution is relatively small. It's mainly a natural cycle. And as I've thought about that and gone back to that and tried to consider that, I just don't buy it. I really don't. It's worth reiterating that you have pretty much, the thing is, so you have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change called the IPCC. It's a group of leading scientists from all over the world assigned to study this issue, and they've been advocating for human-caused global warming as a serious problem for a long time. But all these other, in fact, I think when I first studied this, if I'm remembering this correctly, from 2007 on, every other scientific body of national or international standing agrees that human-caused global warming is a serious problem. So the level of conspiracy and hoax it would be if somehow all of these different people think that scientists are all together. People have this distrust of science. Science is an inherently conservative process, and these people are not all in cahoots with each other. If somebody could disprove this, there'd be much incentive to do that. And yet you have so much agreement in the scientific community. And I'm just deeply concerned that there is an anti-science mentality that evangelicals often have. So that's the first thing to say.
All right. So let's break this down bit by bit. First, Gavin says the more common response is to say, okay, yes, that's happening, but it's a natural cycle, not human caused, or to say that's happening, but our contribution is relatively small. It's mainly a natural cycle. These are the claims that Ortlund attributes to evangelicals like me who are skeptical, right? These are what the people he's being critical of are buying into. The notion that it's either not contributed to by humans at all, or it's humans are contributing a very small amount. So this is all that Gavin says we skeptics buy into, all right? Then he rebuts that position by saying that would require there to have been this conspiracy and hoax. He says the level of conspiracy and hoax it would be if all of these people agreed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a rebuttal to the skeptics' claims. It's not what their claim. It's not what he's saying their claim actually is. He's not saying they buy into this. He's saying, okay, but if you think that's true, the problem with that is it would require this big conspiracy and hoax. That's not the same thing as saying you buy into conspiracy and hoax. He goes on to say that people think scientists are all together. People have this distrust of science, but these are not, the phrases people think and people have are, they're not universalizing statements. He's not saying all people think, all people have. And it is in fact true that many people think that scientists are all together and that many people have this distrust of science. It's just true that there are many who do. It doesn't mean most. Certainly doesn't mean all. But it's not universalizing. He's just saying this is a common problem. And then he concludes this section with, I'm just deeply concerned that there is an anti-science mentality that evangelicals often have. He's saying this is true of evangelical skeptics often, not always. So when we look at this step by step, we see number one, Ortlund says of evangelical skeptics only that we believe humans aren't the main cause. That's all he says we buy into, is the notion that we believe that we humans aren't the main cause. He rebuts that claim with it would require conspiracy and hoax, given the consensus that the scientific consensus that allegedly affirms that, or that is allegedly a consensus, that humans are primarily responsible or largely responsible for climate change. Again, rebutting with that would require this is not to say you believe this. In fact, this is a common problem that you find in theological arguments and debates. I know this firsthand. Somebody believes something, and then a critic says, okay, but the logical implications of that view, blah, 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 blah. If you follow this line of reasoning and you get to the end of it, it entails this. These beliefs entail that, so you believe that. Well, no, that's not true. To say that somebody's beliefs would entail something is not to say that one believes something. Those are two different claims. Nowhere does Gavin in this video say that evangelical skeptics generally, let alone altogether, buy into or accept this conspiracy theory. And all he does is observe the existence of some skeptics who do believe that scientists conspire. None of this and as I said, there are indeed some who do, even if many of us do not. So you put all this together, and what you see is that conclusively, undeniably, there is no way in which Ortlund in his video ever says that anyone who rejects the consensus is buying into conspiracy and hoax. This is a blatant and undeniable misrepresentation of what Ortlund says. But let's look at a second example. So this is the same quote I had up from the book a few minutes ago. And here, to finish out the other half of the sentence, the part of it following the semicolon, she says that to not accept that consensus, Ortlund says, is a failure to take a responsible posture as a Christian. Here again, the claim is unambiguous. There's no lack of clarity in the claim that's being made. And that claim is that Ortlund says those who reject the consensus take an irresponsible posture. So let's watch the clip. And this again is just absolutely and undeniably false. Let's watch the video again. And once again, we'll break it down detail by detail.
However, today, when we talk about climate change, we're talking about an extremely rapid change caused by human activity, not natural causes. This is not the natural rhythm. Now, that's the whole point, and that's the thing that people tend to dispute. But I'll say a couple things about that, and we'll talk about this a little bit. Number one, it's just good to observe, first of all, that there is pretty much a scientific consensus, or a very close to a scientific consensus on human-caused climate change as a very real problem. And this is, again, the appeal and just the burden I have when people are dismissive towards this. If you're going to go against a near consensus in the scientific community, don't just shoot from the hip. Study it and make sure that that's a wise thing to do, because I see a lot of people reacting instinctively rather than really hitting the books. And I don't think that that's a responsible posture for Christians to take. Whatever conviction we come to, we should come to it by thorough study, among other things.
All right, let's break it down. He says this, again, is the appeal and just a burden I have when people are dismissive towards this, right? His concern is not the rejection of the consensus. His explicitly expressed concern is uninformed dismissiveness, sort of waving away with, waving the hand to that can't possibly be true without having done any study. That's his concern, number one. Number two, he says, if you're going to go against a near consensus, don't just shoot from the hip. Again, his concern is shooting from the hip, right? Uninformed dismissiveness. He's just asking skeptics to inform themselves. He's not asking them to accept the consensus here. In fact, notice what he says. This blows Megan's claim that she's not misrepresenting him out of the water. Because look what he says. If you're going to go against a near consensus, make sure that's a wise thing to do. What does that imply? That it's possible that rejecting the consensus is wise. He's saying, yeah, it's possible that wisdom entails rejecting the consensus, but make sure that that's the case through study. How could you possibly be accused of insisting that insisting in your video that your viewers must accept the consensus or else they're buying into conspiracy and hoax, if right here in his own words he implies it's possible to come away after the studying it still going against the consensus, and in so doing may be a wise thing to do. And then he goes on to say he sees a lot, not all, not even most. He says he sees a lot of skeptics reacting on uninformed instinct. Again, that's his concern, is this uninformed dismissiveness. And that is what he says is not a responsible posture for Christians to take. He's not in any way, shape, or form saying that rejecting the consensus is not a responsible posture for Christians. I apologize for the double negative there. He's saying reacting instinctively is not a responsible posture for Christians to take. And you know what? In matters like this, that's true. Now, I do think that there are some issues where it may be responsible to react instinctively. So, for example, even if you've never studied the topic of the Trinity, it is probably a good thing to react instinctively in rejecting arguments against the Trinity because of the ecumenical creeds, because of 2,000 years almost of tradition, and because of the clear biblical texts. But even if you haven't researched all of that and come to your own informed conclusion, it's probably good to instinctively react negatively to and reject anti-Trinitarian claims. But there's nothing about the prospect, the specter of human caused climate change that should engender this kind of instinctive rejection. And that's what he's saying. Rejecting anthropogenic climate change, specifically the consensus in favor of it, is irresponsible if the reason you're rejecting it is because you're uninformed and haven't done the study. And once again, not only did he earlier imply that it's possible to come away rejecting the consensus and have that be a wise thing to do, here he implies that skepticism or even outright rejection can in fact result from careful study, because he says whatever conviction we come to it by thorough study. Once again, you cannot accuse Ortlund of insisting in his video that Christians have to accept the scientific consensus in favor of anthropogenic climate change, and if you don't, you're a fool and a liberal, or a fool and uninformed and a fundamentalist, etc. If he, in his own very words, implies it's possible to come to that very same conviction through careful study rather than instinctive dismissiveness. So what we can see from this clip, from which Megan pulled out a little phrase and a couple of phrases, is that Ortlund does not decry rejection per se. He decries uninformed, instinctual dismissiveness. Having a posture that is from the outset predisposed to just reject out of hand the scientific consensus, assuming that's what it is, that is an irresponsible posture. He asks evangelical skeptics to study, and he implies that rejection could possibly be wise and result from that careful study. As I just said, he implies rejection can result from careful study. He just thinks that many evangelical skeptics of climate change don't really study. And then he says that uninformed, instinctual rejection is an irresponsible posture. He's not saying that rejection of the consensus is an irresponsible posture. He's saying that kind of uninformed, instinctive rejection is an irresponsible posture. Never, in no way whatsoever, does Ortlund say, imply, allude to the idea or whatever that rejecting consensus, quote, is a failure to, quote, take a responsible posture, unquote, unquote. So this, again, is an undeniable... I'm sorry, I was looking at a ridiculous comment in the chat. This is an undeniable, incontrovertible misrepresentation of what Ortlund says. Let's take a look at another one. Another couple of pages later, Megan says that as for why Ortlund feels his brothers and sisters must accept the prevailing climate change narrative, he, that is Ortlund, offers nothing more original than those three magic words, love your neighbor. All right. Once again, there's no ambiguity in the claim. There's no difficulty in parsing the claim that Megan is making here. And that claim is that Ortlund says Christians must accept the consensus, and for only this one reason, this love your neighbor idea. Here again, this is undeniably false. This claim about Ortlund is false. And thank you, Risto, in the chat for pointing out that I've already expressed several... I mentioned that I'm a young earth creationist and that I'm a biblical inerrantist. At the very least, the young earth creationism is 180 degrees opposed to the old earth creation and possibly even theistic evolution position that Ortlund takes. And there are others as well. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I'm not a fanboy or a bodyguard of Ortlund. I care about the impact that Megan's book could have had, and hopefully will if she corrects herself and apologizes and retracts these misrepresentations. So anyway, again, the claim here is that Ortlund says Christians must accept the scientific consensus, and for only this one reason, love your neighbor, and this is undeniably false, as we will see. So here again is the clip in which the quote is taken out of context. Let's watch.
Christians should care about environmental issues like climate change. And I would even say that of all different people, Christians should especially care. So if you take a Christian and an atheist, both of them have reasons to care about climate change, but the Christian has maybe slightly more reason because the particular beliefs of Christianity, the particular worldview that is inculcated by the Christian gospel, is one that should naturally incline us to care about issues of stewardship and sustainability and responsible usage of resources and things like that. It's right there in our creational mandate. It's so significant that when God makes human beings, there is that phrase. It's not just that we're made in God's image. The immediate follow through is let them have dominion. Now, we can debate what that means, but there's this clear charge of stewardship over creation. Second of all, the basic principle of love your neighbor, that applies to how we think about our children, our grandchildren, future generations. And then there's just basic principles that all Christians believe in that play into an issue like climate change, wisdom in planning for the future, opposition to greed, contentment and valuing simplicity and modesty of lifestyle. You think of Proverbs 38, which says, give me neither poverty nor riches. I know these things are all kind of basic, but the truth is, what I'm trying to say here is there's nothing in our theology that would discourage us from being, in principle, open to these kinds of issues.
Okay, let's break it down. Christians should care about environmental issues like climate change, Gavin says. So he's saying we should care about climate change. He's not saying that we should accept the consensus or that we must believe it, right? And I want to offer a brief discursus here or excursus here into what we mean when we talk about when we say somebody should care about a claim that one rejects. So here are some examples. I'm a young earth creationist, as I've already said, and yet I completely agree that I should care about evolution in an ancient universe, even though I'm a young earth creationist. Now, why should I care about evolution and scientific consensus concerning the age of the universe? Because there are many, many people who reject Christianity, they reject Jesus, because of these issues, evolution in an ancient universe. So if we young earth Christians want to stem the tide, if we want to, if we're going to evangelize to people and they push back because as I'm a young earth creationist and they say, how could you possibly believe in that, blah, blah, clearly Christianity is a load of bull. If I want to avoid having that happen, I've got to have an informed response when the person that I'm talking to, that I'm trying to evangelize to, raises these issues. It doesn't mean I have to believe in evolution or an ancient universe, but it does mean I have to care about those topics so that as a young earth creationist, I can remove an obstacle from the faith of the people that I'm trying to evangelize. Here's another example. We should care about Jesus as a copycat of pagan myths, even though as Christians we reject that. Now, why should we care about the claim that Jesus is nothing but a copycat of pagan myths? Because there are many people who reject Christianity because they think he is. If we don't care about the claim that Jesus is a copycat of pagan myths, then we won't be capable of debunking that nonsense, and we will leave skeptics that we evangelize thinking, well, I guess he is a copycat of pagan myths. It's precisely by caring about a position I reject that I am thereby able to respond to people who do hold that view. Here's another one. We should care about gender ideology and transgenderism, even though we reject them. Why should we for those who don't know, gender ideology is a bit of a nebulous term, but it just refers to the whole scope of views that are being promoted in the public square, according to which sex, and by sex I don't mean intercourse, I mean male versus female, the view that sex is distinct from gender identity, whatever that is, and that somebody could be a sex of, say, male, but have a gender identity of female, and we should respect that and treat them as female, etc. Right? So we should care about that, even though we reject it. Why? Because there are many professing Christians who do accept these, and if we aren't if we aren't prepared to equip Christians to debunk gender ideology or gender ideologies and transgenderism, if we're not if we're not prepared to equip the flock, if we're not equipping the flock to defend against those views, they're not going to be protected, and they will buy into those. And that would be bad enough, but it could go worse. And some professing Christians who then buy into these views could then ruin their life, endanger their salvation if you're somebody who believes it's not that it's possible to become unsaved, or however you want to parse that out, by embracing a self-identity that doesn't match their sex. So we should care about these things that we don't accept, so that we can protect the flock to reject those views. One more example: we should care about the so-called insurrection on January 6th. And here I know there are going to be a lot of people watching. They're like, oh, Chris, how dare you call it a so-called insurrection? It obviously was. It was the most tragic day in the history of American democracy, right? Yeah, it's a load of baloney. There was no attempted insurrection on January 6th. But anyway, we should care about the claim that there was, even if we reject the narrative. Why? Because many think that democracy is at stake in this election cycle. And if you just dismiss the claim of insurrection derisively, the way that I just did, by the way, and you're not prepared to offer an informed rebuttal to the claim that there was an insurrection, that's going to bolster people who do think that democracy is at stake at this cycle, and their vote will end up being driven by fear that democracy is at stake, rather than a objective comparison of the parties' positions. So these are all examples, and we could come up with thousands more. Caring about a position, caring about a claim, caring about a view doesn't require accepting it. It just requires taking it seriously. Being prepared to address it when it's brought up, knowing the ins and outs of the evidence for and against, so that you can come to an informed decision. So when Ortlund says we should care about climate change, he's not saying we should accept it. He's saying we should care about the issue, because if it is a true claim, and then he offers some reasons. So that's number one. Number two, he says that the particular beliefs of Christianity are such that they should naturally incline us to care about issues of stewardship, sustainability, responsible usage, etc. This is actually the first of three reasons that he offers for taking the issue seriously. And that reason, the first of three reasons, is Christian theology should incline us to care about the environment. And that's true. Whether you accept the anthropogenic climate change or not, Christian theology should incline us to care about the environment. I was incredibly disappointed when I heard John MacArthur, a pastor and theologian that I respect, although my respect for him has waned somewhat over the years. But anyway, I was floored and disgusted when I heard him say from the pulpit that our Earth is a disposable planet. No, that's disgusting, and that's not Christian. So yes, Ortlund is right. We as Christians should be inclined to care about the environment by the very theology that we embrace. And that's the first of three reasons that he offers why we should care about the environment. The second of them is the basic principle of love your neighbor. We as God's people are instructed in Scripture to love your neighbor. That's the second of 3 reasons that he offers why we should take seriously, why we should care about the issue of climate change. And then he offers a third, and that's the basic principles that apply in all areas of life as Christians: wisdom in planning for the future, opposition to greed, contentment, valuing simplicity and modesty of lifestyle, etc. These are all things that apply to all areas of life, and therefore have a bearing on the question of climate change as well. So Ortlund says we should care about the issue, and he offers 3 reasons why. All right. And then he says Christians should be open in principle to the truth of anthropogenic climate change. He says there's nothing in our theology that would discourage us from being in principle open to these kinds of issues. This is as explicit as he could possibly be, that he's not trying to persuade people. He's not insisting that people accept the claim of the alleged scientific consensus. He's saying our theology is such that we shouldn't be discouraged from being open to the truth of that consensus. So, putting all these pieces together, Ortlund asks us to care about climate change, not simply accept a consensus. And he doesn't offer one reason, love your neighbor, contrary to Basham's claim. He offers 3 reasons, one of which is love your neighbor, but there are 2 others as well. He says Christians should be, quote, open to the consensus, not that we should necessarily accept it. So in no way, never in the video does Ortlund say, quote, his brothers and sisters must accept the narrative, unquote. That is false. Moreover, he does not offer, quote, nothing more than love your neighbor. He actually offers additional reasons, 3. So here again is a blatantly, undeniably, incontrovertibly false presentation of Ortlund's views in his video on Basham's part. And then I've got one more. This is on page 27, Ortlund both began and ended his presentation by stressing that Christians should discuss the issue respectfully and not attack one another. And just as a side note, you'll see a lot of ellipses. Please go check me out and make sure I haven't deceptively put the quotes together. The reason I've got the ellipses there is simply to get everything I want fitting on the slide at once. That's all. And I've been very careful to capture accurately the point that she's trying to make. Okay. So Ortlund both began and ended by stressing that Christians should be respectful and not attack one another. But it's hard to square that with Ortlund's insistence that those who hold views that differ from him can be doing so only because they are motivated by politics or haven't, quote, hit the books. So the claim here is that Ortlund insists disagreement on this topic can result only from politics or ignorance. That is explicitly the claim that Basham is making in her book. Let's watch the relevant clip, and as you will see, and as we break it down, you will see that this claim on Basham's part is false.
Now, so what I want to propose is that the particular reason why American evangelicals, so Christians in my context, I'm an evangelical pastor, I live in the United States, in Southern California, people in my circles tend to be very skeptical or apathetic or cautious about an issue like climate change. And what I'm trying to do here at the start is say, I don't think that's anything endemic to our theology. I think it's more cultural, political, and social factors. And there's lots there that we could mention, but I think the main thing is just in the United States in recent decades, though not back in earlier times, issues of environmental stewardship and particularly climate change have been associated with political liberalism, and evangelicals have tended to be politically conservative. And I think that is the biggest single factor for why more Christians aren't more active in kind of leading the charge on something like climate change. I don't think there's anything theologically that would discourage us from caring about an issue like this. I know there's an initial shock value when people hear, when evangelicals hear you talking about climate change, but when you get into it, you kind of realize like, well, yeah, it actually, and as I'm going to say next, I think the basic idea of it makes a lot of sense. But it just, there's nothing that should make us not open to considering this. And I guess to get to the point here on this first point. I'm just deeply burdened that many people come to this super strong opinion about climate change, just as they do on other social and cultural issues, without having studied it. Not based on the evidence, but based on the socio-political associations of the issue.
So remember Basham's claim that Ortlund insists that people who disagree with him can only disagree with him because of politics and ignorance. That was the claim. But let's break this down. Ortlund begins by using the language of tending to be very skeptical. He's talking about tendencies and generalities, things that are very often true, that many American evangelicals are very skeptical, apathetic, or cautious for reasons that he goes on to explain. Okay, so he's not universalizing. He's talking about tendencies and generalities. Somebody in the chat is asking where do I disagree with Gavin, because at so far I've defended him on every point. Yeah, I agree with him that he's being misrepresented on every single point. I don't agree with the positions in his video. As I began this video with, I reject anthropogenic climate change. Ortlund accepts it. I'm a young Earth creationist. Ortlund is not. Ortlund is open to the COVID-19 vaccines. I am not. I refused to get it. I still haven't gotten it for a few reasons, not the least of which is that all of them were developed by using copies of cells that ultimately originated from aborted unborn children. And there are other examples that I haven't even mentioned. Ortlund and I disagree on a ton of stuff. I'm probably significantly to his right. And I say that thinking he is on the right side, right versus left spectrum. But yeah, I'm to his right even on a lot of issues. So no, David, just because you're hearing me defend him on every point where he claims he's been misrepresented doesn't mean that I agree with him on everything. I just agree with him that he's woefully misrepresented. Anyway, so let me go back. Number one, he's talking about generalities and tendencies. He's not universalizing. Then he goes on to say, I think it's more cultural, political, and social factors, most particularly climate, the fact that climate change, alarmism, if you will, has been associated with political liberalism. So what Ortlund says is that he believes this to be the most common reason for skepticism, not the only one. And then he says, I think the biggest single factor for why more Christians aren't more active in kind of leading the charge in defense of the environment. So notice he's saying more, not all, not even most. He just says more Christians would be more concerned than they are and more active than they are if it weren't for the fact that climate change claims are associated with liberalism. And then he says that the very point he's making, explicitly, he says his point is that many people, not all, not even most, many people come to reject the consensus, the alleged scientific consensus on climate change without having studied it because they have this instinctive rejection of it based on its socio-political associations. That is his explicit point, that many skeptics react to its liberal reputation. So, number one, Ortlund says most, not all skeptics are politically motivated or unstudied. He uses words like tend, more, suggest, and many. He never universalizes. Very clear, he's talking about what he sees many, maybe even most, but many evangelicals doing. He's not talking about them all. And he explicitly says that his point is that many, not all, skeptics are reacting uninformed. Thank you, David, in the chat. I'm glad that we cleared up our misunderstanding, and I meant no hostility. I'm a little heated right now. I hate when Christians misrepresent each other. It's so damaging, not only to our witness to the larger unbelieving world, but it's so damaging to our own fellowship and unity that we're supposed to enjoy. Not unity in the sense of uniformity, but unity in sense of loving one another and fellowshipping with one another. I just get really heated. So I apologize, David, if I reacted too strongly to what you said. Anyway, so explicitly, Ortlund says that his point is that many, not all, skeptics are reacting uninformed. So there's no way in which anywhere in his video there's no way in which Gavin, quote, insists that those who hold views that differ from his can be doing so only because they are motivated by politics or haven't hit the books. This is, again, an undeniable, incontrovertible misrepresentation and defamation of what Gavin said in that video. I want to play a very short clip, I think it's like 15 seconds, from a recent episode of Matt Walsh. But although I am going to play this just one clip, he has said this on numerous occasions. Just in the past few months, I think I've heard him say what you're about to hear him say 4 or 5 times, right? And what he's talking about situations in which he will make generalizations similar to what Gavin did in his video, but Matt in these situations uses far fewer qualifying terms than Gavin does. As we just saw, Gavin uses many more, suggest. He goes out of his way to use qualifying language that makes it clear he's not talking about universal. He's not talking universally. And Matt uses a fraction of that kind of qualifying language. And yet, when he makes these generalizations and then he gets people complaining about what he says, this is what he says in response.
So it just really annoys me in general. You get so used to this, but people who intentionally miss the point, people who get hung up on like specific exceptions that, well, you're making this general point, but I'm an exception because of this. Okay, well, if you're an exception, you're exception. Good for you. Then I guess I'm not talking about you. What are you getting upset about?
What are you getting upset about, you colleague on the Daily Wire, you colleague of Matt Walsh? What are you getting excited? Okay, so you and many other evangelicals who are skeptical of climate change for good reasons aren't the people that Gavin's talking about, especially since Gavin used so many qualifying adjectives and terms in order to limit what he was saying to many, not all, evangelical rejectors of climate change. I mean, either you agree with Matt or you don't on what he said there. And I do. Do you, Megan? But anyway, setting that aside. So here are what are undeniable, incontrovertible misrepresentations on Basham's part of what Gavin Ortlund said in his video. According to Basham, Ortlund says those who reject the consensus buy into conspiracy and hoax. According to Basham, Ortlund says those who reject the consensus take an irresponsible posture. According to Basham, Ortlund says Christians must accept the consensus, and the only reason he offers for why Christians must accept the consensus is loving their neighbor. And according to Basham, Ortlund insists that disagreement can result only from politics and ignorance. Every single one of these 4 claims is absolutely, incontrovertibly, and undeniably false. And they are misrepresentations of what Ortlund actually says in his video. Whatever back and forth they've had since, whatever videos have been done by third parties in defense of Megan. I haven't yet seen a defense of Gavin on YouTube, by the way. I'm happy to be possibly the first. I don't know. We'll see. But regardless of all those other articles and Twitter, conversations and arguments and their back and forth, Gavin's and Megan's, regardless of all of that, these 4 claims that Basham makes in her chapter about Ortlund are absolutely false. There's no getting around that. But let's turn to a few what I think are clear misrepresentations, but I'm going to be a little more charitable here and say these are seeming misrepresentations that are debatable. I don't actually think they are debatable. I think that anybody with a 4th grade reading level will see that these are, in fact, misrepresentations of Ortlund. But in the interest of charity, I'm going to offer a little bit of wiggle room for the possibility they're not. Firstly, on page 29, Basham says, this is not to single out Ortlund, who is certainly not the only young pastor promoting climate change activism as a Christian practice, nor the only one citing the IPCC as an authority. So again, clear claim here. There's no mincing words. The claim is that Ortlund's video promotes climate change activism as a Christian practice. Now, why am I leaving a little bit of wiggle room here for the possibility that this isn't a misrepresentation. Because possibly, not really plausibly, but possibly, Megan thinks that merely encouraging people to study the issue is to promote climate change activism. Maybe. I really don't think so. I think it's implausible that Megan thinks that simply to encourage viewers to do their research is to promote climate change activism. But let's leave that wiggle room there. Nevertheless, assuming that this is in fact a claim that she's making, and by activism she means more than just encouraging people to study, this claim is false. Let's do another clip breakdown.
To my final comment, in terms of what's a practical takeaway of what to do, I want to say something that is exceedingly simple and modest. And that's my fifth comment. Let's talk about this more. Let's talk about climate change more. That's the goal, the only goal for this video. This video is not intended to resolve everything. It's intended to encourage more attention on this topic, because I think that we just don't talk about this enough. I think part of it is it doesn't feel as urgent. There's such low incentive for taking actions that are painful in the moment and uncomfortable to talk about for benefits that are like decades out into the future. Human beings are incredible
Sorry, I just want to make one clarification. This is the one clip where I took a few clips that were separated farther apart and put them together. And that was just so that I could fit in the several things that he says in a short enough clip. All right, let's continue.
Are capable of incredible accomplishments when there's sufficient motivation. And that's what kind of leads me to my strategy point of here, just all my tiny role of just, what I try to do is just encourage more energy on this topic, talking about it, reading books about it, thinking about it, coming to an opinion about it. If people would just, do some research about it and then have an opinion, that alone is, but there is this kind of instinctive backlash.
All right. So let's put the pieces together. Remember, these are clips from where he is explicating his own motivations, what he is trying to accomplish, what he sees as his role in this. Okay. And he talks about a practical takeaway. And that practical takeaway that he offers is to talk about this more. And he says that's the only goal for this video. And he emphatically said it. Like, he wasn't like, yeah, that's sure, that's the only. He was emphatic about it. So explicitly, Ortlund's only goal in this video is to get viewers to talk about climate change more. Now, I will say that's probably not entirely true. It's clear that one of his goals is also to get them to study it more, right? But still, that's not getting them to be activists, not by any stretch of the imagination. He goes on to say that this video is intended to encourage more attention because we just don't talk about it enough. Once again, he's explicit. His intent is not to engender political activism on the part of his viewers. His intent explicitly is to get viewers to pay more attention and talk about it. And then he talks about his strategy, his role, what he's trying to do. And he says all he's trying to do is to get people studying and talking. That's his goal. He's not trying to motivate political activism. He's just trying to get people thinking, studying, and talking about climate change more than we evangelicals tend to do. Once again, he explicitly states, just like in the earlier clips that we watched, that his concern is not with studied rejection, but with instinctive rejection, dismissive rejection that doesn't take the issue seriously. So Ortlund says Christians should care about the issue, not to take one side or the other. He says that Christians should be open to man-made climate change, not simply accept it. Those we've already seen from the previous clips. Here, he explicitly says that his goal is to get Christians studying and talking about it. He's not trying to motivate activism. And what he laments is instinctive rejection, not rejection altogether, the kind of rejection that might result from careful study, which again, he earlier implied could happen, that you could end up, after careful study, rejecting the consensus. So in no way, sorry, I'm exasperated. I'm in no way can Gavin be said to be guilty of, quote, promoting climate change activism as a Christian practice. Here's a second seeming misrepresentation. Now, why am I going to say this one's seeming and debatable? Well, it's because this comes in the final paragraph or paragraphs of the chapter, 2 or 3 paragraphs after she concludes her analysis of Ortlund's video. All right. So and this has been explicit in some of her defenders and even herself response to Gavin's claims of having been misrepresented. They will say, "Oh, he wasn't talking about you at this point. He's moved on. He moved on a few paragraphs. Or sorry, she moved on a few paragraphs ago." All right. But I'm going to argue that no, that's not true, and I'll break that down. But first, here's the quote. Coming at the very end of her chapter, it is wrong for pastors and Christian leaders to make agreement on environmental policies a test of biblical faithfulness as a measure of one's commitment to the gospel. And it is wrong to bind consciences with a blithe and unthinking love your neighbor. Now, again, Megan's defense and the defense other people have offered is that this is stated a few paragraphs after Megan concludes her treatment of Ortlund's video. And if that were the only thing that's true, we might accept that defense. But there are at least 2 real problems with that defense. First of all, notice she concludes with, "It is wrong for pastors and Christian leaders." I looked up the word pastor, and we see on page 24, California pastor Gavin Ortlund. Page 28, pastor like Gavin Ortlund. Page 29, Ortlund, who is certainly not the only young pastor promoting. And then we get to 30, it is wrong for pastors to make agreement to test of biblical faithfulness. I didn't see any other uses of the word pastor in those pages leading up to that conclusion. Now, does she talk about other pastors? Perhaps. Does she use the word shepherd or something? Yeah, maybe. But if you just look at the language of pastor, you can see that multiple times in the pages leading up to her conclusion, she calls Gavin a pastor, and that's the pastor who she talks about. And then she concludes with, "It is wrong for pastors to make agreement to test biblical faithfulness." So it sure seems pretty strongly like she's claiming that Ortlund makes agreement on climate a test of biblical faithfulness. And this is absolutely false. But there's more. Remember, she says she concludes this chapter with, "It's wrong to bind consciences with a blithe and unthinking love your neighbor." But that love your neighbor phrase, the most recent time it's been used in this chapter is just a few pages earlier, where Megan writes that as for why Ortlund feels his brothers and sisters must accept the prevailing climate change narrative, he offers nothing more original than those 3 magic words, love your neighbor. Now, we've already shown that that paragraph is a misrepresentation of what Gavin says, but that's the last time love your neighbor was mentioned, and just a few pages before her conclusion. So whom else could she be talking about when she says it's wrong to bind consciences with a blithe and unthinking love your neighbor? It seems pretty clear that she's claiming Ortlund binds consciences based on the principle of love your neighbor, and here again, this is false. So let's watch the clip here.
But my basic appeal on this is, can we talk about this more? It just seems like it's one of those issues that should be way high on the level of urgency. And yet you can understand in the midst of so many other things going on in our world, it gets put on the back burner. And this is something we need to think about. This is something we need to talk about. And Christians should not be sitting on the sidelines in a conversation like this. Of anybody, we should be diving in. Remember Jack Collins' word, capture. We should be leaning into an issue like this. So that's my appeal. Thanks for watching this video. I appreciate it. If you have a different opinion about this, that's fine. Let's just argue about it respectfully rather than just attack each other. And so let me know what you think in the comments.
So as we've seen, Ortlund is the pastor repeatedly mentioned using the word pastor leading up to her concluding paragraph in which she says pastors shouldn't make climate change affirmation a test of biblical faithfulness. And he's the most recent one said to offer love your neighbor as a reason for embracing climate change, which he doesn't. He offers it as a reason to care about the issue. But anyway, he's the most recent one to offer that reason for anything at all when she finally talks about binding consciences based on that principle. And then here, in this clip we just saw, Ortlund says it's fine if Christian viewers disagree. He just wants respectful dialogue. And I saw one YouTuber, I laughed when I heard him say this in defense of Megan, saying, yeah, Ortlund says it's fine, but he could mean it in the way that a Christian might say to an atheist, hey, you should agree with me that Jesus is the Messiah, but if you don't, it's fine. No, come on, that's so absurd. He's clearly saying to his brothers and sisters in Christ that it's fine if they don't end up agreeing with him. He just wants respectful dialogue. It's clear to anybody with a fourth grade listening level in this case that he's saying it's okay if you end up disagreeing with me. To suggest that he's passive aggressively or in much more severe way saying it's fine is just ludicrous. So there's no way in which one can sincerely make the claim that in his video, Gavin makes acceptance of anthropogenic climate change a test of biblical faithfulness, or that he binds consciences based on love your neighbor. It's just not possible. One more seeming disagreement, and this will wrap things up. Remember, the name of this book is Shepherds for Sale. And in the introduction to her book, she explains, I think, what she means when she says that by claiming that there are too many shepherds for sale in evangelicalism. She says, secular leftist organizations are funneling money into evangelical front groups. Why have so many evangelical institutions and leaders started promoting causes like lobbying for fossil fuel regulations? Are they dupes or deceivers? Is it organic or orchestrated? Certainly, money is playing a role in some of these evolutions. So she's saying, thus far in her introduction, that one of the kinds of shepherds she's talking about when she labels them shepherds for sale is people for whom money plays a major role in their change of mind. Okay? But she recognizes that there are some who may indeed be influenced by leftist organizations, influenced by things other than money. But she explains why those other things qualifies as or makes such shepherds for sale. She explains why other things than money can qualify. She says it need always be explicitly transactional. Institutional prestige, seeing oneself lauded as more intellectually and morally advanced than the rest of the evangelical rabble. These kinds of things can be a potent elixir as well. So can gilded invitations to the most exclusive parties in the world. And then the very next three words she says in the beginning of the next paragraph is, Pastor Rick Warren, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'll come back to Pastor Rick Warren in a second, but notice she's saying another sense in which she's talking about shepherds who are for sale are not just pastors who are influenced by money to change their mind, but there are also pastors who are influenced by their desire for prestige, seeing themselves lauded, however you pronounce that, as being more intellectually and morally advanced than the rest of the evangelical rabble. These kinds of things are also senses in which a shepherd could be for sale, right? And then she immediately goes into a discussion of Pastor Rick Warren. And why is that relevant? Because of how she introduces Gavin Ortlund in chapter 1. California pastor Gavin Ortlund may not have reached the name recognition of Rick Warren, right? So when you put these pieces together, although it's debatable a little, maybe, it certainly seems as if what Basham is claiming is that Ortlund promotes leftist causes for either money or prestige or praise or access or whatever. In short, that he is a shepherd for sale. And this is false. Or at the very least, it is completely unsubstantiated by Basham. She offers no legitimate evidence in support of this claim whatsoever. Because as we've seen, all the claims she makes about Ortlund are patently, undeniably, and incontrovertibly false. So, we've seen in this second part these what I'm calling seeming or debatable misrepresentations, even though I don't think they're debatable at all, really. We see, firstly, Basham's claim, seemingly, that Ortlund's video promotes climate change activism as a Christian practice. We've seen Basham's seeming claim that Ortlund makes agreement the test of biblical faithfulness, and that he binds consciences based on the principle of love your neighbor. And you've seen her seemingly claim, excuse me, that Ortlund is a shepherd for sale, in as much as he is promoting leftist causes for something in return, whether that's money, prestige, what have you. The first two of those claims, insofar as they are actually claims that Basham is making, and I think it's pretty clear, those two claims are false, undeniably, incontrovertibly. And if those are, in fact, the claims that she's making, they misrepresent what Ortlund actually says. And as for the third claim, what appears to me to be what she's claiming, that Ortlund is one of these shepherds for sale, like Rick Warren, she mentions, who are promoting leftist causes for something in return, this claim is at minimum wholly unsubstantiated by Megan's book. She leaves readers with no reason whatsoever to accept this claim that it seems she's making, that Gavin Ortlund is a shepherd for sale. So, those are, I'm going to zoom my camera back out a little bit and switch to full screen mode. Hold on. There we go. I guess I should put my overlay back on. Let me do that as well. There we go. And then zoom back out. I should have used OBS Studio, which is what I normally use to do these kinds of things. But I, for time's sake, ended up just using StreamYard, and it made it a little bit difficult to switch back and forth between that presentation mode and full screen. So anyway, those are the receipts. Sure, a few of those seeming misrepresentations are debatable to some small extent, but at the very least, there are those four claims that aren't debatable. She's clearly making those claims, and they're clearly and incontrovertibly false. And as I said, the reason this matters, even if you can dig up other things Ortlund has said. He in the past he said something sloppy when he was asked about LGBTQ issues, and he has since clarified where he stands. There are claims, people have dug up things that he said about vaccines or whatever. Fine, let's grant, for the sake of argument, that in all those other examples, Ortlund is clearly somebody who is advancing liberal causes. And let's even say it's clear that he's doing so for nefarious reasons because he's for sale. Let's grant all that. The fact still remains that Megan blatantly and very badly misrepresents what Ortlund says in the video that serves as her receipts. So even if her overarching point about Ortlund is true, and I don't think it is, but even if it were, the fact remains that anybody who reads that and then goes and watches his video, if they have even an ounce of integrity, will come away agreeing that Megan has badly misrepresented him. So why does that matter? Well, again, as I said in the beginning of the video, the point that Megan is making in this book is an important one, and it's one I think she's right about. And this book had the potential, hopefully still does, to wake some evangelicals up to the creeping leftist influence, the leftist influence that is creeping into the evangelical church. That point is an important point to make. The receipts that I'm assuming she offers in the other chapters, I haven't gotten there yet, that's important. People need to hear that. And I want to see it change people's minds and more fervently fight against that leftist influence. But when the entire internet sees, after reading your chapter, Megan, and then watching the video upon which your comments about Ortlund are based, when they do that, and they see how badly you've misrepresented Ortlund in the sole piece of the evidence that you offer in that book, regardless of what evidence that you may offer elsewhere on Twitter, when they see that, they're left with no reason to think that they should take the rest of the book seriously. You could plead with them, please ignore that part of the first chapter where I badly misrepresented this guy and take the rest seriously. You can plead with them all you want, but they're not going to do it so long, or many of them won't do it so long as you continue to double and triple and quadruple down on your misrepresentations of Gavin in that chapter. Megan, as somebody who is a huge fan of the Daily Wire, as somebody who is very conservative and borderline fundamentalist, as somebody who believes in the major premise of your book, I'm pleading with you, I'm begging you, please get your heels out of the sand. Is that the expression? Digging their heels in? Stop digging your heels in. Stop doubling down. You look, we often, when we're zealous about something, our zeal takes over a bit and we make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes happen in something as lasting as print. It happens. I get it. Frankly, I'm not even upset at you, Megan, for doing it in the first place. What I'm primarily upset about is you're doubling down on it. All you have to do to make this right, Megan, please, as a brother, from one brother in Christ to a sister in Christ, from a fellow conservative fan of the Daily Wire to a colleague of the representative of the Daily Wire, to a fellow theologically and politically conservative person to another politically and theologically conservative person, a fellow person concerned about the creep of leftist influence into evangelicalism to another person who does. Please, from that person to another, I'm begging with you, do the right thing here. Make this right. It isn't a big deal. You're not gonna lose credibility for just owning up to the mistake. It's the exact opposite. You will gain credibility that you've lost. Probably not all of it. That's the thing that sucks about making a mistake in a lasting medium like print. But you will gain some of that credibility back. And your book will have a larger impact than it would have otherwise had if you simply say, I made a mistake. You could even say, I think that my overall analysis of Ortlund's posture is right, but I chose a really poor example as evidence. And I was wrong. I misrepresented Gavin, and I apologize. And I'm going to try to get my publisher to allow me to modify that first chapter in a second printing. That's all. And then you could continue to talk about, look, Phil Vischer has been complaining about misrepresentation, and it does seem as if even, Megan, you're acknowledging that you misrepresented that one video that you footnote, but you're absolutely right about Phil Vischer more largely, and the receipts are all over the internet about that, and I'm fully on your side when it comes to people like Phil Vischer. So I want to see your book have the effect you intended to have. And all that you have to do to enable that to happen far more than it will right now is just own up to the mistake that you made in a moment of passion, understandable passion, righteous passion, I would say. But sometimes even righteous passion can get the better of us. And just admit that that's what happened here, apologize for the misrepresentation, and try to get your publisher, HarperCollins, to allow you to modify the chapter. That's all. That's my appeal to you, Megan. I don't know whether Megan's actually going to watch. I hope so. If you are watching this, and especially if you're somebody who, like me, agrees with the larger premise of Megan's book, please share the link to this video around, get it out there. So Megan needs to see this. If she doesn't watch it right away, she needs to see it. And be shown the receipts that prove that she made a mistake here. Please do that. And then I'll now do the YouTube stuff that I said I was going to skip at the beginning. If you appreciated this video, even if you don't like me, even if you don't like the fact that I'm a young earther, or even if you don't like the fact that I hold to minority Christian views on other topics, if you don't like the fact that I'm going for an hour and a half, I've got these ridiculously long videos, if you don't like my poor PowerPoint, there could be all sorts of reasons you don't like what I have to say. You might not even like Ortlund. But if you agree, but if you liked the receipts, if you liked the presentation, or if you just liked the way, the manner in which I'm trying to appeal to Megan and demonstrate my claims, please do like the video. And if you're not already, please do subscribe to my channel and click the notifications bell. Those things help the algorithm, or help my channel benefit from the algorithm. And please do tune in to the next episode of Theopologetics, whenever that happens to be, and on whatever topic it happens to be. I guess I'll end it there. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And I appreciate all the engagement in the chat. Thank you very much. And sorry, I just know some chats here. I'm trying to understand why so many were ready to jump on Gavin and reject his reasoned and fair defense of himself. Yeah, me too. It baffles me. And frankly, so you say it seems like once he was labeled the face of something nefarious, people didn't want to let that go. Yeah, maybe. Or people are, like me, very interested in seeing this book be positively received and have an impact. And so in an attempt to mitigate the damage that this controversy is doing to her and her book, they are trying to, they are in that, out of that desire, siding with her against Ortlund. That's what I think it probably is. But to those of you doing that, let me appeal to you for a moment. That doesn't help the book have positive impact. It's the exact opposite. Again, when everybody that already is predisposed to accept the premise of the book, and everybody that's chomping at the bit, right? They're already, this book is just red meat for them. If you want this book to have positive impact, you've got to change hearts and minds. You won't have an impact if all you do is feed red meat to people that already agree with you. So if you want to have a positive impact, if you want to affect change, you've got to affect change. And the people whose minds and hearts you want to change are the very people who will see Megan's terrible misrepresentation of Ortlund and be turned off from the rest of the book as a result. People at the very beginning of the chat, I put it up on the screen at the very beginning of the stream, said that's exactly what's happened. So those of you who are out there defending Megan and rejecting Gavin's defense, if you're doing it because you want to reduce the negative impact the controversy is having on her book, you are shooting yourself in the foot. You are cutting off the branch on which you're sitting. The way to reduce the negative damage, the negative impact, the damage that this controversy has done to Megan and her book is to persuade successfully Megan to apologize and retract. That is how we get this book to have more positive impact than it will currently otherwise have. So I guess I'll leave with that appeal. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.